former and current Chuck E. Cheese workers, what are some of the worst things to happen to you while working? By a random kid too.
Fikova22 says, one time at Chuck E. Cheese when I was working there some food fight broke out and one kid chucked his entire cake straight at Chucky and he cried about how he didn't get a cake. The kid's mom went into the bathroom and she was in there for a good 15 minutes. I went in there to ask what was up and I saw her having a mental breakdown. Turns out she spent hours making that cake special for him, and it was all ruined in about 30 seconds. Edit, wow, thank you so much for the upvotes. Most of my posts and comments get 5 upvotes max. Now I've almost tied the amount of the original post. Thank you for reading my story and upvoting it, it means a lot.
Sunfire Cape 2G says, I was the technician at a Chuck E. Cheese in high school. One day I was covering someone and I had to wear the suit and do the show. On my way back to the room, a little kid runs up to see Chuck E. and stabbed me in the ankle with a pencil as hard as he could. I rushed into the back room and took off the pants portion of the suit, pulled down my sock, and a bunch of blood poured out. Didn't even go home early, boss just had me stand at the door.
DarthSkittles says, thank you, unnamed Chuck E. Cheese employee who saved naive, desperate for employment me by answering my question about employment with you don't want to work here. You are a hero.
koofdakeefsta says, didn't happen to me but somebody got stabbed. We actually hired a bouncer on our busiest days because we attracted the trashiest people. There was also a ton of sex in the Chuck E. closet.
Somegi Somewhere 81 says, hey, sir, someone left a whole bunch of brownies in the sky crawl. They weren't brownies. Edit, words.
BigBearBeer says, had a complaint that a kid was dipping toilet paper into a women's toilet then eating it. He was. Same kid beat me mercilessly while I was wearing the rat in hat suit, while screaming man in suit. The best was a complaint about the same kid eating from other families' tables. He was, and he looked them dead in the eyes while doing it. These were all different days. Three-Eyed Grow One says, oh wow, an Ask Credit question I can actually answer. I worked at Chuck E. Cheese for a year in high school. It was the worst job I ever had. The absolute worst day was having to clean shit and vomit out of the sky tubes. 2 separate occasions, several hours apart. I've never been the same since. The funniest thing, though, was the co-workers who had a threesome in the closet where we kept the Chuck E. costume. Guy asked me cover for him during closing and took 2 other co-workers into the closet and banged them. Thing is, there was a camera in that closet. That was the last time I ever saw all 3 of them.
Dutch Infidel says, former, anytime a kid threw up in the bull pit was an especially horrible day. There were several instances during the 6 years I had worked there, but these times were quite memorable. There were 2 ways you could do this. 1. A large, both sides opened, cardboard box, to cordon off the affected area, saying it was a slow day and other kids weren't splashing all the balls owned. We had very large netting bags so that you could gather all the balls and take them outside and they would be sprayed off. Or 2. If the spew was all up in the ball pit then all the fucking balls had to be gathered, sprayed off and the inside liner that held the balls had to be wiped down and cleaned. Only good thing about having to take out all the balls was that you could find some pretty good stuff that happened to be in people's pockets and fell out, money, pocket knives, and even rings.
Hermantioush says, the worst part was wearing that rat suit after this one dude was in it. He took it serious and would get up on the prize tables and get the kids to chant Chucky, Chucky. I could freaking hear it back in the kitchen over the noise and music. Dude was butt-ass naked in the suit. And he sweat a lot. I probably have hepatitis. Best part was taking the leftover pizza dough into the back lot after closing and having a 1v1 death match throwing softball-sized dough balls at each other's heads.
Shakespeare_line says, I worked at a Chuck E. Cheese in high school in a wealthy area, so I got the bright idea to neatly fold and rip off the part of the bill that stated, tips are included in the cost. They weren't. I got my coworkers in on it and eventually we started presenting the bills to each other's parties and saying, If you'd like to tip your host, they can only accept cash to plant the idea in the parent's head. One day we got caught. I got blamed. I wasn't allowed to host parties anymore. Instead, the GM hired his family and friends and allowed them to abuse my system. It was a gold mine, because sometimes I would take home $200 in cash as a 16-year-old. I didn't even make that in 2 weekends of hourly pay. Edit. This happened in the state of California, where servers still make minimum wage, not some $2.13 bullshit. I was originally offered around $8.50, but that was retracted and I was paid $8, because I would receive tips, supposedly. Which is what motivated me to beat the system.
Jackson0209 says. Former employee of 9 months. 1. Very old woman peeing on the carpet in the entrance while standing up. 2. Cleaning pee out of the sky tubes after a complaint that it got in a kid's eyes and he couldn't see. 3. Walking into the bathroom to find an abandoned pair of underwear with poop in it. Took everything I had to not throw up when throwing it away. 4. While in the Chucky suit, being asked by a large black man wearing all blue why you got all that red on, huh? 5. Asking a mute girl if she wanted to put her candles on her cake and being told she can't talk by her parents. There were definitely many more less than enjoyable experiences, but these are the ones that stand out to me.
Cease Throwaway 123 says. Former manager checking in from like 10 to 15 years ago with a throwaway. I have a few worsts, I have divided them up below. Actual worst. The time a custody dispute carried into a birthday party for a 3-year-old. Multiple people had guns and knives, someone actually fired at the mother, and someone else tried to cut the father. This caused a full-on riot resulting in a lockdown. Luckily we were very close to a police station and no one was seriously injured. Hilarious worst, 2 employees having sex in the Chucky closet, where employees could go change without being in the way of the kitchen or in sight of the kids, while one was wearing the Chucky head. This was bad because once the closet was unlocked/open you were in sight and we had lots of horrified parents and terrified children and it was really hard to not laugh. Creepy worst, one of the animatronics failed and became possessed. We were about 2 weeks away from becoming a stage 2 store. Next level of upgrades/improvements including removing the animatronics, so they told us just to let it go and try to keep it in check. It sounded demonic and would turn on at random, like in the middle of the happy birthday song. Its head hit a point that it couldn't turn anymore and got stuck moving a few inches back and forth and then caught on fire while trying to demonically still sing. Sad worst, we all had to get background checks if we had not been employed for 30 days because a manager in our district, but not our store, turned out to not be taking care of his dying mother for a month. He was actually in jail for the DUI. The area manager was concerned about what else they didn't know because he had been with the company for like 25 years and worked up from a cashier. They ran a background check and he had multiple issues with the law. His family vacations were all timed with when he was in jail, and was a registered sex offender.
Gatorgood15 says. Walked in on this 40-year man jerking off. Our eyes met and we kind of just stared at one another. Most awkward 10 seconds of my life.
EarlyHemisphere says. So, to sum this thread up, ball pits are nasty and you should watch out for shit and vomit in the high tubes.
Hero_Iron says. I worked at SEC as my first job. On more than one occasion kids went up to the sky netting, basically a bird nest made out of rope suspended in the air, and would take a shit. Naturally, since it was netting the shit would fall through and onto anyone who happened to be below. After this happened a few times we decided to move the carousel ride, which had a roof, under the bird nest so at least it would land on the roof and not someone's head.
Hot_oil says. Cleaning puke out of the sky tubes. The smell was horrifying.
RtlsnkSteve says. Worked at SEC for nearly 2 years during high school and then again later for another year. The worst parts almost always had to do with the parents, of course. The one that sticks out in my head the most is the super drunk, very unattractive older woman who stuck her hands down the front of my pants. It was just after I started. I was 15 and spent the first few months there working the game room floor. This lady came up to me saying one of the machines was not giving out tickets and I needed to check it out for her. I sat down on the stool to open up the panel and check things out. During this time she began rubbing my back saying how cute I was and how much of a help I was being. It was about this time I realized she reeked of booze and was drunk. Next thing I knew, one of her hands was down the front of my shorts and she had found the prize she was after. I quickly sprang up from my seat saying I had to get some tools from the back. I went and told the game's manager what happened. I'm not really sure what happened after that as I stayed in the back for a while. Next time I came back out she was gone, thankfully. As a whole, I look back at my time working there with fond memories. Our place was almost entirely staffed with high school or young college kids. Had a ton of great times there and the pizza kicked ass, but yes, cleaning shit out of the sky tube sucks. Edit. Just remembered the craziest thing that ever happened while I worked there. Next door to us was the DMV and one day a lady parked in the fire lane in front it to help her elderly passenger inside to find a seat. Well, in the time it took her to do that, a tow truck swooped in to tow her. This happened fairly frequently in our parking lot, so my coworker buddy and I got closer to the glass at the front of the store to watch the shenanigans. The tow truck backed right up to the car, lifted the front end and started pulling away with it. As the towed car passed our windows, we realized there were kids in the back seat. My buddy and I ran out the front doors of the store and started chasing after the guy screaming about the kids. We finally caught up to him in the back of the parking lot where he would usually secure the car to the truck before taking it back to the lot and told him what he did. He just said oh shit, dropped the car and took off. At this point the mom of the kids had ran to where we were at, understandably, screaming about her babies. The cops were called and since we knew which company the truck belonged, the tow truck driver eventually showed back up. Not sure how much trouble the driver actually got in, but the cops were telling us that the law states that tow truck drivers must verify there are no passengers in the car before doing a snatch and grab. Adrenaline was definitely pumping with me and my coworker for a while after that one.
Get underscore it underscore and underscore get underscore it underscore out says, I have a good friend who used to work at Chuck E. Cheese. Him and his fellow co-workers conspired over the span of a few months to steal the various piece of the suit. They would claim that this part got ripped or some kid messed up this part and we had to throw it out, until they had a full suit. For what reason, you ask? Literally just to take turns showing up to parties in the full suit to make a bunch of drunk people super stoked.
Neacon says, I worked at one for several years. I didn't have extremely horrible things happen to me though. I was a game tech, which meant I would unclog tokens and perform minor repairs on games while also delivering pizza to tables and clean up. Things I can remember that did happen that were weird/funny were: 1. Having to escort drunk people out of at closing. Cashiers would try to limit people's intake, but when others would buy for them they could still get plastered. 2. Parents fighting over video games. Never had an issue with kids, it was always the parents wanting their little snowflakes to play on some game, usually skee-ball. We were told not to try and break them up, manager would just call the cops. So I would go over to them and say they could either leave or deal with the cops. They always left before the cops arrived. 3. Got hit with skee balls a few times when going up on the lanes to unclog a ball or fix something, nothing major, but it got to the point of making eye contact with all the kids before going up with warnings I would throw them back. 4. Riding the drink trays down the slide at closing time and getting up to some impressive speeds and sliding across the floor. 5. Cleaning out the tubes that run around the ceiling and finding shit and puke and stuff up there. 6. Seeing how dirty the ball pit was. Seriously, don't let your kids go in there because they only get cleaned out like every few months, and if some kid pisses unless we got told we didn't know. 7. Cleaning up the massive mess some people leave after doing their DIY party.
Found dirty diapers and all kinds of mess under the tables that made me question how they can live with themselves after making such a massive mess and just leaving it. 8. Not me but another person wearing the Chucky costume got groped by some MILF, not that he complained, but I know that a few of the times it would be one of the female staff in the costume and could imaging it going down worse for the guest in that situation. 9. A tech replacing a broken CRT in a game, and while lifting the tube/electronics holds it with the tube out and pressed against his thigh, it proceeds to discharge into his leg, leaving him in a fetal position and me laughing so hard I had to close the door to the repair room to stop laughing. 10. For a while I was emptying the tokens from all the games every Sunday, would start out with clean nitrate gloves, and by the end of the day they would be a dull gray/gold color. I stopped trying to handle coins after doing gig and realizing how dirty most money is, especially stuff handled by those little walking way stump children.
idksammi says. Not my story, but my dad's. This was decades ago. He worked as the man in the suit, and all his friends knew it. He had this one friend, we can call him Gene, who liked to take things over the top. He was working and suddenly, my dad hears a roar. He turns to see his buddy Gene sprinting at him, full speed, no stop in sight. Boom, my dad is on the ground, head off, and the only thing heard was the screams of young children. My dad got fired that day. Edit, told my dad about posting here, and he told me that his boss thought it was a planned prank on the company. As much as my dad denied it, he couldn't keep himself from laughing. My dad was a known prankster anyways, so he just accepted it.
Aviating Penguin 24 says. This happened 15 years ago or so. I was designated to be the big cheese himself, a glorious honor, haha, and the fact that I was one of the only guys that worked there, which meant I was almost always the chosen one for that hard-ass suit. This day a football team was having a party there, 10 or 12-year-olds or something. My manager knew what was going to happen. Me though. My young naive brain only had innocent thoughts about making the children happy. Then the coach playfully tosses me a football, in my vision at least, so I actually caught it. It happened, a horde of 10-year-olds descended upon me in the cramped area between two lawn tables. Valiantly as I tried, these little demons proceeded to tackle me onto the ground. I thankfully didn't break anything and I kept my head from falling off while being knocked around, but I was pissed. As soon as they got off me, I got up and left to go to the back and take off the sec outfit. Another time, the same manager as the last story made me work off the clock, but I was too young and dumb to document and report it. Edit, a word. Edit 2, a letter. Edit 3, wow. This comment has single-handedly more than doubled my karma.
MO317K5 says. Former employee, 6 months in high school. 1. A family racked up a $300 bill and tried to pay for it with food stamps. 2. Two families got into a fight during their kid's birthday party and had to be escorted by the police out. I later found one of their weaves on the table. 3. I got kicked in the crotch while in the Chucky suit. I'm a girl, and it still hurt. 4. A little girl asked me when the real Chucky was gonna come out because I was too short to be the real Chucky. 5. A mom wanted to show her kid that under the costume, it was just a real person and asked if I would take off Chucky's head to show her daughter. I did, and the kid got even more freaked out thinking that the mouse had engulfed me. I've repressed a lot of the memories. But this is what I can remember.
I am your king bitch says. I remember when I worked at that shithole. I had to take out the coins out of the machines and refill the tickets and clean. Worst thing that happened was not the shit or vomit in the tubes above that the kids crawl in, but the time a kid apparently had to take a shit, but didn't want to go to the bathroom cause he would lose all his progress. So he takes a shit right where he is standing. Guess he was 3 tokens deep, so he committed to the game. Well, at one point he loses and runs out of tokens. Guess what he does next? If you guessed, walk away with the shit on the floor like it wasn't his. You are on. He fucking grabs his shit and just smears it all over the machine like he is frosting a cake. Full on tantrums while trying to talk shit. then just wipes their hands on the carpet. Glad I heard this from a coworker.
Palifaith says. Not a former employee, but one time I saw two families going at it, throwing punches, cursing and spitting because one of the kids took some tickets from one of the arcade games that didn't belong to him. Cops had to be called and both dads got arrested.
Sprinkler 2007 says, having to wear that costume, it's probably one of the most degrading things I've ever had to do. Having to clean the bathrooms. Watching children open up the containers with cheese and lick them and wonder how many times I've used condiments after children have licked them. Catching strep throat several times. Have a group of bored parents test the system of making sure the correct kid leaves with the correct parent. We don't usually check this because it would be obvious if you're taking a kid cause the kid would be crying. That's usually when I would check, or if the kid didn't look like the parent. Have some lady accuse us of spraying Windex in the salad. Manager told us we couldn't take sick days unless we had a doctor's note, which is against the law. Manager would scream and degrade us, teenagers, in front of whoever. Having to close at the end of the night because we would basically be cleaning up after children. Having to deal with shitty parents. Having parents complain about our attitude because we don't want to be around their shitty kids. Having kids constantly running while you're trying to deliver a pizza. Wheelies. Having to clean the sky tubes after a kid shit in them. Having to work with teenagers who are not the nicest group of people. Mothers dropping their children's diapers on the floor instead of the trash can. I've blocked the rest out.
ElipsonLemon says. Not the worst, actually pretty good depending on your perspective. My dad used to manage one back in the mid-80s and would always go through the cash registers at the end of every night and trade in his own pocket change for all of the rare, vintage coinage that teenagers would steal from their parents' stashes. He amassed a great collection of silver coins and other discontinued currency. Mercury dimes, buffalo nickels, etc. He still has all of it to this day.
Danielle 15 says. I was fired on the spot. Oh wait, you said worse.
Bam223 says. I worked there for only 4 months in high school before I quit. Everyone was required to wear the mouse costume. Kids would literally beat you up to get your attention. It sucked because I went to a Catholic high school where we wore uniform skirts. Every Monday morning I would go to school covered in bruises.
Faye_Betsy says. I've been at SEC for 4 years. I'm a cashier, and I remember I had a closing shift one night. Cashiers close down the cash area, salad bar, beverage bar, and restrooms, at least at my location. I usually leave the restrooms last, so on that night I had finished up everything else and went to clean restrooms. My location is typically very clean, so I had never had an issue with restrooms. Until that day. When I walked into the women's room, I saw what no employee wants to see in the restrooms. It was in the biggest stall. Just imagine poop, but everywhere. On the walls, on the seat, on the floor. It was like, semi-solid. Almost liquid-like. On the floor near the drain was more poop, imagine the poop emoji, but in real life. That's what was there. I remember a coworker came in and Snapchatted it for some reason. I have no idea how a human could have accomplished this. I called my manager for backup. He came in, and screamed. I screamed. We then cleaned it up begrudgingly. I wore like 5 pairs of gloves at the same time. Took us far longer than usual. I wasn't happy, to say the least. Luckily it has never happened since. Nothing has ever been worse than that. TL, doctor, big stall of women's restroom, explosion of liquid like poop everywhere. The real-life equivalent of the poop emoji also makes an appearance. My manager and I scream in horror.
Loyalist_pig says. Not an employee, but one time, as a very young kid, my older brother almost got lured out of the building by a stranger with the promise of a bunch of free tickets. I intervened, and everything was fine. Employees were notified. Another time he almost got into a truck to help find a missing puppy. He was a very kidnappable kid, I guess, but I can't seem to get rid of his dumb ass.
Applesauceyes says. Ooh, I have a Chuck E. Cheese story. I was about 8 and being a goof. I saw the Chuck E. Cheese guy in costume and we were playing. I gave him a playful little kick in the shin while giggling like a little maniac. Well, he played along, and gave me a light little tap in my shin with his shoe. But it wasn't a shoe. It was like a big solid rubber cartoony brick of rubber. He didn't mean to hurt me at all, but just that little tap basically rolled up a few layers of skin very easily and bruised the EFK out of my leg. At that instant I stopped fucking with Mr. Mouse and silently endured my agony while pretending I wasn't in pain. I knew he didn't mean it, even then, but it hurt really bad and I just wondered of. Now that I'm 20 years older, I'm mortified to think of the headlines and crucifixion that would have followed in modern times. Child plays with frustrated employee lashes out and strikes child. Or something. It was sad to think about how every little thing these days can end in a lawsuit. I can $100 recall him moving his foot forward in basically slow motion and barely tapping my shin, which instantly peeled up a few layers of skin. Would have been terrible if it was the age of cameras and I had started crying or something, then they'd have video evidence of the abuse and the man's life wouldn't have been the same. We Chuck E. Cheese.
Myskers says, taking the balls from the ball pit to the car wash in big mesh bags to clean them was never fun.
Fuzzy Octopus 97 says, after reading through this I'm going to be telling my son that he's lucky as shit he got hired on at Domino's before Chuck E. Cheese got back to him.
The _fluffy_cactus says, I wore the mouse suit once while working during high school. I was surrounded by an intimidating gang of 10-year-old boys, who cornered me by the basketball game. They stomped on my tail and tried to look through my eye holes and yelled Chuck E. Cheese isn't real, while trying to identify me. I never wore that godforsaken suit again. Damned elementary schoolers traumatized me for life.
Ketogamer says, I heard those workers that got murdered had a pretty Mayday.
Raagarne says, that damn suit. I was a game room tech, that part was awesome. I got to play games all day, fix coin jams, etc. However, one day before I was allowed to leave, they decided I had to wear the suit. This was 10 years ago, so it was before the redesign of Chuck E. Cheese. I'm 6 feet and with the suit on, ears included, I was a giant. You can't really see in the damn thing. Anyway, they lead me out into the main area and I'm basically lumbering around. It's this horrible experience because I couldn't see, I kept bumping into things. You'd think this would be the worst part. Nope. It was the kids I scared. They counted. I made 7 children break down, scream, and bawl their eyes out. I felt like crap for it, wasn't much I could do, though. It got better. I finally get to take the suit off and leave. I'm walking to my car and this family is leaving. The little boy is crying. I figured it was due to having to leave. Nah. He's upset because Chuck E. Cheese terrified him. The mom goes, I've hit it, you need to straighten up already. If you don't, I'll take you back and feed you to that giant mouse. Worst experience. Another time, we had these sketchy fellows come in and try and rob us right before close. Our manager, let's call him O, decided he wasn't going to call the cops and would handle it himself. So, he runs back to the kitchen and grabs the pizza cutter. Basically, it's a giant curved machete. He's trying to be all sneaky, kind of hide it by keeping it close to his leg. We all thought we were about to get shot because he wanted to play hero. The guys ended up fleeing, after seeing him with a giant blade, but it was a pretty terrifying experience for a young high school kid.
therealtyrrell says, I used to work for a security company who had been contracted out to a local Chuck E. Cheese franchise. I worked here and there watching the security monitors. Pretty standard gig, but would catch some stuff on the monitors. Kids picking on each other was pretty standard. Caught a few kids trying to steal stuff from where the prizes were exchanged for tickets. Once 2 parents got into a full-on fist fight during a kid's birthday party. Every exchange between the 2 dads, I assume, got increasingly hostile until one just sucker punched the other. After a few months they moved me over to the night shift. It paid better because it was overnight. At first I thought it would just be really boring. Not much going on after hours. Sure, there's a lot of cash going in between birthday parties and families in general being in there buying food and tokens and whatnot, so a robbery is possible, but not likely. When I had my first overnight shift, my supervisor told me to make sure I kept an eye on the power. For some reason it got a little wonky overnight, and it'd probably be operating on the backup generator a lot. If that happened, I had to make sure I wasn't using any power I didn't need to. I was pretty pissed about that. Couldn't they get that fixed? If someone broke in while I had a light off or something somewhere because it wasn't absolutely necessary, my ass was on the line. I was also told to stay in the security office, and keep the doors locked. That seemed counterintuitive to me. Usually you make a few rounds on overnight security. This wasn't my first time doing overnight. Usually when you start in security they stick you on graveyard because no one else wants to deal with it. It was totally mind-numbing. It was so boring and there was so little to do, my mind kept playing tricks on me. I thought I kept seeing the animatronics in places where they shouldn't have been. A few times the manager had definitely forgotten to put them back into storage, but they always left them in odd places. I figured they were heavy and the manager was just lazy and didn't bother to put the last one or two back. Those things always gave me the heebie-jeebies. I quit that gig after a week. It was so boring, and it was creepy at night between the strange instructions and the animatronics just being left out all over the place. The pay wasn't worth it. Last I heard they had gone through another guy right after me. Heard he got injured on the job somehow. The fight between the two dads was probably the most entertaining thing that happened though.
Killimonjaro says, I watched someone pick their ass, smell it, and wipe it on the back of some random kid's shirt.
Deleted says, I worked at Wandering High School. It was awesome. We had the old animatronics and a ball pit and horny co-workers. One time a portly young child who exceeded the age range for our single-seat Ferris wheel got her arm stuck behind the seat. The machine stopped, she cried, the fire department came, we applied more butter and she was eventually freed. Oh, worst? Sorry, that was the best. The worst was when my ex's new BF called me on a store's number and threatened to beat me up in the parking lot. That sucked. Everything else was awesome. I heard Bex Loser for the first time ever in that set kitchen.
CipherInTheKnow says, that one time I chucked cheese all over the mini merry-go-round.
Jim_stick says, I know this going to be buried. I grew up in a small city. Many years ago I worked at a place like Chuckled Cheeses. Dodging go-karts and cleaning up child puke was terrible. I very passively met a wonderful person. Neither of us realized how important it was. It's about 8 years later. We are getting married in 3 weeks. As terrible as it was, best thing I could have done.
Seekelser says, not an employee but a customer. 6-year-old me was running errand when I noticed this kid, maybe 4 years old, sitting up against one of the arcade machines looking dazed and like he had been crying for a while. I get a closer look and see he has a hole in his forehead. I'm talking like an inch-wide hole that went down to his skull. Some streams of blood pouring down over his eyes. I remember panicking and asking where his parents were. He just sat there slack-jawed and I freaked out. I picked him up best I could and took him to our table. My parents were like, why did you bring this child over here? Oh my god. Employees were summoned and they took the kid to find his parents. To this day I have no idea what happened to cause that to the kid. I'm assuming he was running errand like me and must have ran into a corner somewhere. Hard. Seeing little bits of meat and exposed skull has stuck with me.
Loudloud says, I can actually answer this one. The amount of kids that put jello in their mouths then spit it back out at the salad bar is incredible. It's also not uncommon for a kid to throw up in the sky tubes or pee down a slide. But the best one I saw during my time there was a girl maybe 4 years old eat her body weight in pizza and soda then run around for an hour. At one point she got very pale and puked more than I've seen any grown man puke in my life. Her mom picked her up and started sprinting to the bathroom like an Alabama running back. The girl just kept puking and left a decent trail the entire route to the bathroom. 10/10 would watch again.
LameBeer_rage says, a bit late to the game but I was actually a patron, not a worker. My sister and her family went to a Chuck E. Cheese, and my wife and kids met them there. I had to go to work for a meeting, but I would drive there and meet everyone afterwards. I pull up to the parking lot and see two cop cars out front. A man was standing outside with a present, but the two cops were barring him entry. A kid is being dragged inside by what I presume was his stepdad and mom, all the while screaming "Daddy! Daddy!" to the man outside. The man with the present was screaming at the cops and his wife. A man can't see his son on his birthday? It's taking ages to pull this kid back in, and the man is just repeating and now begging to give his son the present. I'm still by my car waiting for the scene to clear. Eventually the kid is inside, the cops get the man to leave, though he looked thoroughly crushed, and I go inside to witness a kid's worst birthday party. I did, however, score a bunch of tickets for my daughter and my nieces so they could get some shitty prizes.
AnneFranc says, just waiting for the staff from St. Charles, Missouri, during that birthday party shootout to show up.
Doctor_Buckcookie says, had a friend who worked there who had a nice little racket going. He would always volunteer to work the prize counter, which for some reason, nobody wanted to work. What he would do is when the kids came up to the counter to turn in their tickets, he would ask them what prize they wanted, and a lot of times they would pick something that was worth more than the tickets they had. So my friend would turn to the parents and offer them a discount rate, usually $5 or $10 which the parents accepted as it got them out of there, and they just would have spent that money on tokens anyway. My friend would make a nice chunk of change after a busy weekend working the counter.
JMZ777 says, had a fist fight break out between the mother of the birthday child and one of their guests' family members. That's one birthday that kid won't forget.
Raventerra says, oh boy, finally one I can answer. I'm currently a manager at SEC and have been there for a total of 3 years and counting, so I have tons of fun stories, but my favorite to tell, the least favorite to deal with, was what we refer to as the vomit incident. It was my 3rd month there and I was restocking the salad bar, when a lady comes up to me and says that her 12-year-old son threw up in the girls' bathroom. Shortly after telling us this, they book it out of the building. Now, that should have been a warning there, but I didn't think anything of it. So being the good employee I was, I offered to clean it up, expecting it to be just a small bit around a toilet or something like that. So I grabbed the semolina, the powdery stuff we use to glot up the vomit and make it more solid, and a broom to start taking care of it. However, upon approaching the soda machine near the bathrooms, I was hit with a wall of one of the most ungodly smells I have come in contact with. That should have been warning too, but I proceeded into the bathroom anyway. As soon as I opened the door, I saw it. This was no minor spill, oh no, this was a whole new level of puke. The stall the kid threw up in was covered entirely in vomit. The entire toilet, the floor, even the fucking stall walls, nowhere was safe from what appeared to have been this kid's vigorous projectile vomiting. The worst part is that out of the 3 stalls he could have defiled, he chose the middle one, causing it to ooze into the other 2 stalls from under the dividers. Now, me being the good-natured, never talk back newbie that I was, and frankly in a dumb moment of pure shock, decided the best course of action was to sprinkle the powder and start sweeping, while trying my hardest not to add to the chunky orange swamp coating the stall. So many mothers with their kids tried to come in to use the bathroom, and immediately turned right back around. After about 15 minutes of getting nowhere, I finally shuffled out to find a manager, to inform them of the mess. We wound up having to close off both bathrooms, due to the horrible smell from the puke pit spreading, and bringing out our heavy-duty cleaning machine to just completely deep clean the bathroom. But hey, my manager gave me a free pizza out of it, so I guess it wasn't all bad. I've had some doozies like getting cornered and beat up by kids while I was Chucky, while my general manager at the time watched and did nothing, having to clean pee out of the sky tubes, playground bolted to the ceiling, that was dripping from a crack onto the floor below, and countless more. Not to mention all the shitty entitled guests coupled with our recent alcohol additions. But my co-workers here are chill, and I get free pizza, and I get fun stories, so I guess at the end of the day it's worth it. TL, doctor, kids absolutely defiles entire bathroom stall and more with projectile puke, and I had to clean it up. Got a free pizza though, so not a total loss.
MaxyScab says, I was a party hostess for a year and a half, so I have plenty. Some were just general situations. 1. A kid pooed in the sky crawl slide and another poor kid slid through it and spread it all the way down the slide. My manager told me to meet him by the sky crawl with no context and then picked me up and shoved me into the entrance with some Windex and paper towels. I had to scale down the slide with paper towels on my butt. 2. While cutting cake for a 3yo party, some kid started rubbing my back. I thought, oh, that's sweet, until I went to the kitchen and my boss told me I had cake all over my back. I had to work 5 more hours like that. 3. An adult man followed me around for hours trying to get my number until my manager had to tell him to leave or he was going to call the cops for harassment. The guy looked me in the eye and said, "This isn't over." I watched him lingering in the parking lot for a bit after. 4. There was a guy that was a regular to Chuck E. He would bring in a lot of different children. We just assumed that he had a lot of kids. One day the cops come in with his picture and asked us if seen him. He was a sexual offender. 5. A father and a 17-year-old son run into Chuck E. Cheese with bags. Hopped over the kid check rope and ran to the back. Cops came barging in right after and chased them around the game room with tasers out before tackling to the ground. 6. I'd quit the pizza was, but it did some terrible things to people's stomachs. One morning the toilet in the men's bathroom was clogged. My manager brought in the wet bag vacuum and stuck the hose into such the clog out. The vacuum was on blow and when he turned it on it blew shit all over him, me and my coworkers, the ceiling, stalls, floor. It was everywhere.
Mermurder says, "Not a former employee, but I had something weird happen to me when I was a kid at a Chuck E. Cheese. Was at a birthday party for someone and the guy in a Chucky rat mascot suit came out to sing happy birthday or whatever. After things died down, I vividly remember him coming over to me. He proceeded to pick me up and carry me towards the door. I was only about 5 to 6, so I had no idea what was going on or how to react. He carried me all the way outside, set me down, then went back inside. I stood there for a few minutes like, dazed, then eventually went back inside. I was super fucking confused and didn't know what to do, so I just found the kid's mom and asked her to call my parents because I wanted to leave. Didn't ever tell anyone about what happened because I didn't even understand it myself, and still don't to this day."
Clartier2 says. Former employee. How come no one has talked about the insanity that was working in the kitchen? On busy days I was cemented by the 400-degree oven, would clock in with the sun up, and wouldn't see outside again until it was pitch black. We also had to draw straws over who would be Chucky lol. Edit, only worked there for 9 months. My junior year of high school, but I might come back and post my Chucky walkout story.
mdxdx says, "We found a dead bird in the ball pit. Condoms in the ball pit. Needles in the ball pit. Don't ever let your kid in a ball pit."
Discount Keysnose says, "I used to sit, in costume, on a bench right outside the door. I'd cross my legs and put my arm on the back of the bench and sit perfectly still like a statue. As people walked in, they'd inevitably come over for a picture or to get a better look, and right as they got close I would come to life really fast to scare them. The kids would usually startle, but then everyone would laugh. One time I was doing it and a kid did not want to come sit by me. His parents kept urging him. He got close enough and I came to life and he freaked out. So much so that he wouldn't go in the restaurant. For his own birthday party, it turns out. His mom took him home and his dad stood at the door and told diving family and friends that the party was cancelled because Chucky scared the hell out of the birthday boy. The parents were really cool about it, but I felt like such an asshole."